man, nothing's wrong here. Everything that's happening is a result of the work of the Spirit. This is the fruit of the Spirit's working. This is a fruit of the blessings of the Spirit on the people. Remember, this is the first volume of Luke's book. He's writing to the early church, to the people who are in the midst of great persecution and a lot of disruption. Bombs are going off around them, as it were, because of the gospel. And he's saying to them, hey, sit tight, trust, because that means the Spirit is working. He is blessing. When there's this kind of trouble, when there's this much danger, you can rest and rejoice because the Spirit is clearly blessing. Luke is writing to a church that's facing great persecution, and by telling the story in the way he's telling it, he's impressing upon the early Christians that this is what it's like to follow Jesus. It's not wrong. There's nothing going wrong. Peter writes to everybody and says, hey, don't think it's strange. These afflictions are strange things, as if they're weird. They're not strange. This is normal. This is the way it has to be. Just as when Jesus was despised and rejected by his own friends and family, so there were people that Luke was writing to who had been rejected by their friends and family too. Their mothers and fathers had disowned them and told them they had no place in their family anymore. Some of them had experienced their families going through funerals for them because they were dead now, that they had now become Christians. Luke is trying to show them that what they're facing is nothing new. Indeed, it's the fruit of the work of the Spirit. This is the way God works. Blessing comes through tribulation. Blessing comes through suffering and affliction. When you're suffering, when you're going through difficulties, when you're having difficult times, you know this is not out of the ordinary. There's nothing wrong here. This is the way God works. Because the Word of God comes to us to transform us and to transform the world. And that means that it's the enemy of the status quo. If indeed we're receiving the gospel and understanding it, we are constantly being called to leave our old ways behind, all the things that are contrary to the will of God, and move into new directions. The gospel calls us to break old patterns of living and behavior and embrace new patterns of living. We have to drop old ways of thinking and embrace new ways of understanding. That's the way the gospel comes. Following Jesus is bloody. It costs you. It means transforming. And that's not fun for us who like to stay the same. We don't like these changes. But following Jesus means that life will involve battles and wounds and fights and riots and disruptions of all sorts, because that's how the kingdom comes, and it cannot come in any other way. You see, there was a time when Christians understood this, but we have passed that time, and now most of our friends who are Christians don't understand this anymore. There was a time when men's lives were filled with battle and their hearts were filled with peace. But now it's the opposite. Men's lives are filled with a lot of ease and convenience and not much battle. We got a lot of external peace, but our hearts are filled with anxiety and fears and worries and doubts and no joy. What's wrong? It's because we've forgotten these basic things. We've forgotten that life means following the living God, and that involves embracing some danger and disruption, receiving some deep wounds, and ultimately death. Right? The kingdom of life doesn't end in death, but it involves death. The kingdom of life ends in resurrection. Jesus, as the son of Joseph, is going to go through his life with great conflict, with intense joys and intense sorrows, and finally he's going to be put to death, but that's not the end of the story. Like Joseph, he will be raised up from the pit and exalted to a position of rule over all the earth. And as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, Jesus, like Joseph, will bring salvation to the world. He's going to break in pieces all the old alliances and all the false gods and bring men to himself so that they can have life. The Jews, in their pride and arrogance, rejected this view of the kingdom. They were not going to humble themselves. They were not going to walk by faith. They refused it. They refused to do it. But sanctification means the Lord continues to show us what is wrong and to show us ways in which we must change every day. That's what living in communion with the living God involves. You have to change your mind, you have to change your ways, but that's the only way you can be conformed to Jesus. And therefore, the gospel is not a reason to rebel or a reason to get upset or a reason to get frustrated. It's a reason to rejoice because Jesus is working and He's going to transform us and the world to His glory.